So today, the only Republican presidential nominee in history who, while campaigning, is facing fraud charges in New York and California. One in a case brought by the New York State Attorney General, and the other in a class action suit on behalf of students who say they were defrauded by Donald Trump's Trump University, which of course was not a university. The only presidential candidate in history facing coast-to-coast fraud charges acted shocked today that we all don't just take his word for it when he talks about money that he says he has raised for and contributed to veterans groups.
I wanted to keep it private. If we could, I wanted to keep it private because I don't think it's anybody's business if I want to send money to the vets.
That's how Donald Trump began talking about this today. And that is why he has repeatedly been diagnosed by his campaign opponents and psychiatric experts as a pathological liar. A pathological liar will tell you a lie to your face that he knows you know is a lie. Think about that. He knows he's not getting away with the lie. He knows you know he's lying. He knows you're watching him lie in that moment, but he simply cannot resist lying, even when he knows that you know the truth. That's what makes it pathological. It's not just lying. Liars who are not sick in the head only try to get away with lying when they think there's no way you can catch them in the lie. Here's the guy who just said, I wanted to keep it private. Here he is, back when he wanted to keep it private, on January 28th, when he skipped the Fox News debate because he was afraid of getting Megyn Kelly questions, and he held what he called a fundraiser, a public fundraiser on TV for veterans. Here is how private he tried to keep it.
I called some friends, and we just cracked, the sign was just given, we just cracked $6 million, right? $6 million. Donald Trump gave $1 million, okay?
Only a very, very sick person could stand in front of a microphone on national television and say that on January 28th, brag about raising $6 million, and brag about contributing $1 million himself, both of which were untrue, and then today say this.
I wanted to keep it private. If we could, I wanted to keep it private because I don't think it's anybody's business if I want to send money to the vets.
That's such a profound pathological lie that I wanted you to see it again. Pathological lying was first diagnosed and described by a German physician in 1891. Most politicians fear getting caught in a lie, but Donald Trump has no such fear. Pathological liars do not fear getting caught lying. They are incapable of telling the truth. And they are, of course, outraged, and I mean outraged, when you don't believe them. The truth is that Donald Trump's press conference today meant to clear the air about his failure to raise $6 million for veterans groups and his personal failure to donate $1 million that he already said he had contributed on January 28th. That press conference did not actually reveal the truth about any of that. Donald Trump provided no proof at all of any contributions. He provided simply a list of groups that he says received contributions, but proof would be showing us cashed checks, which he did not do. But he did find time to say this about the man who's been trying to find a Republican to mount a third-party challenge to Donald Trump.
Bill Kristol's a loser. His magazine is failing, as you know. It's going to be down. I don't think it even survives. He's trying to drive you guys a little bit nuts. If they do an indie, assuming it's decent, which I don't think anybody with a reputation would do it because they'd look like fools. But what you're going to do is you lose the election for the Republicans, and therefore you lose the Supreme Court.
Joining us now, Ben Ginsberg, a political analyst for MSNBC and a partner at Jones Day, the law firm that represents Donald Trump in his campaign. Ben specializes in election law. Howard Dean is a former governor of Vermont, former DNC chairman and Hillary Clinton supporter. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. And Jon Favreau, former speechwriter for President Obama and a partner at Fenway Strategies. And John, since you're out there across the country tonight, not in the studio, I wanted to start with you, and also,
Sure.
also because you, as part of the Obama speechwriting team, have been a co-author to some of the most eloquent and thoughtful American political speeches of our time. And so I want to begin with your analysis of the Donald Trump press conference today and what it was we were watching.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we saw the man-child running for president throw a temper tantrum, which is what he does when someone tries to expose that he's a pathological liar. And what he does is he attacks people, and he targets people. He targets the press. He targets federal judges. And I think that the difference is right now he's targeting people with his big mouth and his Twitter account. But what happens if he becomes president and he has at his disposal the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, and America's nuclear arsenal, right? Like, this is a man who is going to take people's press credentials away. He's threatened to open up libel laws so people can sue the media. I mean, it's entertaining to watch now, but when you give this guy power and he throws temper tantrums like this and is exposed as a liar, I think it's very dangerous.
Let's listen to the moment where he called Tom Yamas of ABC News a sleaze. Let's listen to this moment.
I'm not looking for credit, but what I don't want is when I raise millions of dollars, have people say, like this sleazy guy right over here from ABC. He's a sleaze in my book. You're a sleaze because you know the facts, and you know the facts well.
So, Ben, the Republican nominee for president has defined what a sleaze is. That is someone who knows the facts well, and then apparently lies about it. The first line of that statement is him saying, "I'm not looking for credit," which we all know is a pathological lie. So do we now have Donald Trump diagnosed as both a pathological liar and, by his own definition, a sleaze?
It's a pleasure to be with you, Dr. O'Donnell. So this is an unusual campaign. We can stipulate to that.
Howard, the guy goes out there and, you know, he picks on a couple of reporters. Two of the reporters he picks on, Hispanic last names. And the one he goes after most viciously, Tom Yamas, Hispanic last name. And this is someone who is theoretically supposed to appeal to voters other than white men?
This is a fascinating campaign, and people have said that Trump is, you know, is it within 2 points or something, or 4 points nationally, or whatever it is. The most interesting thing about this is the game has already begun, even though the Democratic nomination is still being contested. I think obviously Hillary's going to win it, but and they're already appealing to their bases and turning off, or Donald Trump is already appealing to his base, but he's turning off the middle. And this election, like most American presidential elections, is going to be decided by the 15 million voters that are in the middle. Everybody else is already spoken for. The Republican Party's already come together and consolidated around Trump for the most part, despite Bill Kristol's efforts. And you know that from looking at the polls. We haven't done that yet on the Democratic side, but we will. And when we do, we'll be fighting over 15 million voters. Every day that he does this doesn't help him with those 15 million voters.
Yeah. So today, in Donald Trump's mind, was all about how much he loves the veterans. We had a 31-year Navy veteran on this program some months ago who sued Donald Trump for fraud over a condo development in Southern California, sued him in Southern California federal court, condo development in Mexico. Let's listen to what he said. I asked him about, as a military veteran, about his reaction to Donald Trump's, the way Donald Trump talks about military veterans. Let's listen to that. You couldn't have given more years of service to your country, over 30-year veteran of the military. When you hear him talking about how he wants to take care of veterans, what's your reaction to that?
My reaction is Donald Trump is putting on a con. That's all it is. He conned us. He's a con man. What else can I say?
John Favreau, he does leave people speechless at a certain point in the audacity of his con man tactics. Can the Democratic campaign handle this kind of candidate? I mean, he seems to have slipped away from every attempt to corner him that the Republicans tried in the primary.
Yeah, I mean, well, also let's remember that Donald Trump's first pronouncement about veterans in this campaign was when he said that John McCain wasn't a hero because he was shot down. So I think part of this, and part of what the Democrats have to do, and all of us have to do, is remind people of what a con he is, remind people of these lies on a daily basis. And really, this is not ideological. This doesn't have to do with whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or liberal or conservative. The man is a pathological liar. Most politicians, they say things that aren't true from time to time. That's true Democrats, that's true Republican. He is in a class by himself. And you know, it's very dangerous for him to become president. I think we just have to keep reminding people of that.
Let's listen to what he said on Friday. He also mentioned this judge today. This is talking about the judge who's handling the fraud case involving Trump University in California.
I have a judge who is a hater of Donald Trump. A hater. He's a hater. His name is Gonzalo Curiel. And he is not doing the right thing. I'm getting railroaded by a legal system that, frankly, they should be ashamed. The judge, who happens to be, we believe, Mexican, which is great. I think that's fine.
Ben Ginsburg, he thinks it's just fine that the judge is Mexican. Now, your law firm represents him only on the election law stuff involving the campaign, not on any of these fraud cases.
And I don't do any of that work.
But your reaction to that, just as a practitioner, here's somebody who's in federal litigation attacking the federal judge that way.
Yeah, that's not the textbook way to do it. However, he obviously feels strongly about it and thinks it's worth calling attention to it. I mean, the courts don't operate in private. They are public institutions. This is not the first time a plaintiff or defendant in a case has talked about the judge.
Well, it's the first time the plaintiff in this case has said, we believe the judge is Mexican. He was born in Indiana, Howard Dean. Donald Trump was born to one parent who was foreign-born. This judge, both of his parents were foreign-born, but born in Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about the 15 million people in the middle. Hispanic Americans are not in the middle on this one. I mean, I think Trump's last numbers were 19 positive and 72 negative or something like that. We've never seen a number like that for a Republican in a presidential race. And if that's the number on November 7th, Hillary Clinton's going to be the president of the United States.
Going to get a quick break in here. Ben Ginsburg and John Favreau, thank you both for joining us tonight. Howard Dean, I'm going to need you later. Stick around.